Good evening. For tonight's CitySpeak Forum, we look at Measure 2141, the Corvallis Livability Levy. Ballots will be mailed soon, and they'll need to be returned by November 7. On hand to field questions is Mayor Charles Maughan, Corvallis Mayor Charles Maughan, Library Director Ashlee Chavez, Parks and Recreation Director Meredith Petit. I'm Steve Schultz, representing both the organizations that present these forums, City Club of Corvallis and the Corvallis Advocate. City Club of Corvallis is a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that seeks to present a diversity of viewpoints and constructive dialogue. The Advocate offers fresh daily news online, these town hall meetings, and extensive events calendars. Partial funding for these forums comes from Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op. However, we could not present CitySpeak without support from viewers like you. One way you can support these town halls is a subscription to the Corvallis Advocate. If you go to our site, you'll see there's levels at $10 and $15 monthly. If you'd like to send in a question, go ahead and use this email, cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com, or post to the live stream on the social media platform that you are on. Mayor Charles Maughan, I'm going to start with you. Firstly, thank you for appearing this evening. Could you outline what the Livability Levy does and why it needs to be voted on again? But first, could you remind viewers what the current levy cost and clarify if the rate would increase if Measure 2141 passes?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. First, I'd like to just say thank you for the invitation to be here today and to just give the opportunity to present more information to voters so they can make a smart decision. So again, thank you. And thank you to all who's watching. So we'll start, you said first about the rate. So voters are currently paying a rate of $1.07 per $1,000 of assessed property value. The renewal rate is the same, $1.07 per $1,000 of assessed value. So there is no increase. So voting yes on this just maintains what we already have. And what that is the levy provides funding for programs and services at the library and parks and recreation, as well as funding the city's annual social service grants. The reason why it's coming up to a vote now is this Livability levy, was originally approved by voters back in 2011. So this has been around a while. Again in 2013, and the last renewal was in 2019, and that renewal, just like this one, is for 5 years. So that gets us through June 30th of 2024, which is why it must be voted on again if we want to continue these services. You're muted, Steve.
Thank you, Charles. Sorry to the audience at home. To clarify, the levy is going to pay for 3 things. Could you outline that for a moment?
Sure. I'll try not to get into too much detail. So if the levy passes, it will generate $6.5 million the first year and $6.9 million each of the following 4 years. And with that, the first $480,000 per year will be spent on social service grants for Corvallis residents in need. The remaining 51.9% will go to the library for operations, materials, outreach, and special programming, and 48.1% will go to the Parks and Recreation to support the Majestic Theater, Osborne Aquatic Center, Corvallis Community Center, and park maintenance.
Great. Okay, thank you, Charles. I'm going to move over to Library Director Ashlee Chavez. We appreciate your participation as well this evening. Could you outline what the levy will pay for, what the levy pays for at the library, and what the library would need to change if the renewal doesn't pass?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Charles said, thank you so much for having us here this evening and just giving a chance to provide some more information. So the local option levy provides about 35% of the library's overall budget, which is a fairly significant amount of our budget. And so what that covers is our Sunday and Monday hours and most of our evening hours. So right now we have 61 hours of open service at the Corvallis Public Library. And without the levy, we would need to reduce that to 40 hours per week. It also covers about 53% of the library materials budget, which is the budget we use to purchase, books, DVDs, bilingual materials, pretty much anything that you check out from the library is included in that budget. We also fund most of our programming efforts through the levy. So, story time, adult programs, education, outreach. I mean, pretty much anything we do in a public facing manner, providing service to the public through programming efforts is funded through that. And then we also have about 60 staff positions funded by the levy. 20 of them are union employees and about 40 of them are casual substitute employees. And then also many of our outreach efforts like Book Box, which we provide a supplementary library materials to 509J. And we do early literacy outreach at all of our local preschools. Delivery programs are also need to be suspended. And then the last bit is just, we also do have an intergovernmental agreement with Benton County regarding how much funding is provided by the city of Corvallis. And without the levy, that IGA will also be in jeopardy.
Okay, and then really, I want to clarify some of the services that you have would be in jeopardy. There would be an hours cut, right? You covered
Yes.
that, right?
Yeah, we cut 21 hours of service.
And do you have a sense of what hours might be cut?
It would be, we would close all day on both Sunday and Monday. And then the rest of the hours, so the Tuesday through Saturday hours, we would likely have to shave off a little bit on the morning hours and in the evening hours. So that way we're open probably 10 to 5 or 6, depending on the day.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashlee. I'll move over to Meredith Petit. It's first, thank you for appearing this evening. Really, I have the same questions for you as for Ashlee. What does the levy pay for at Parks and Rec? What would your department need to change if it doesn't pass? What does that look like over at Parks and Rec?
Sure. Thank you for the question and thanks for having me. So Parks and Recreation is supported by the levy. Currently about $2.6 million, forecasted getting closer to $2.9 million for the next year. And what that makes up is about 50% of the revenue for our department. The other 50% or the other portion of our revenue primarily is made up through charges for services or fees, so registration fees that somebody would pay to participate for a fee-based program. How that relates to our department, our revenue, we bring in about 50% of our expense budget in revenue. So funded by the general fund for the other half for the department. If that makes sense, I can clarify that too. But essentially our Parks and Recreation levy revenue supports everything that Parks and Recreation does. So our general Parks and Recreation operations, which includes the provision of services and programs and facility operations at 3 of our recreation centers. So Osborne Aquatic Center, the Majestic Theater, and the Corvallis Community Center. There are thousands and thousands of recreation programs and community services that are offered at each of those facilities. And also what it supports is other programs that don't necessarily happen inside or at those 3 facilities. So things like adult sports leagues, youth sports programs, our summer day camps, which often happen and occur in partnership with our school district facilities. We have senior social services that occur, support groups, swim lessons, of course, adaptive programming. Our levy also supports the scholarships that we provide to income eligible individuals so that they can register at a reduced rate to participate in these programs. On the park maintenance side, we also, the levy supports things like maintaining our playground areas and providing those safety inspections. So obviously with reduced park maintenance activities, we would not be able to conduct a lot of those types of activities to make sure that our parks are safe and clean and green. Our park maintenance also collects all of the trash in all of the 47 parks, and they maintain all of the acreage. We have about 2,000 park acres throughout the park system. And they're really focused on kind of those core services with restroom cleaning, trash collection, repairing irrigation, mowing, and just generally keeping things upkept in our park system. Without the levy, it's safe to say that a lot of sort of those recreation services would be drastically reduced. Operating a facility, as you can imagine, is quite expensive. And so I would imagine, and I think this would be open to discussion to, the city council and the community to prioritize what services would stay. But I would point to those types of facilities that really kind of have that a more narrow population base as far as what we're serving. So, very, pointed recreation centers like the Aquatic Center or like the Majestic Theater would be areas that we would likely shutter completely just based on the expense associated with those. I think it's important to note too that the loss of the levy revenue, which 2.9 million dollars, doesn't necessarily equal cutting our expense budget to the same tune, because a lot of those recreation services bring in revenue, and so there's a delicate balance with how we would have to approach that.
So thank you, Meredith. And then I'm going to move over to Charles first, and I may be getting back to Meredith on this one. My understanding, Charles, is that the current levy had a specific carve out or allotment for the Majestic Theater, and a new proposed levy doesn't have one. Could you explain to viewers why that is and what you expect will happen to the theater's funding? Charles?
Well, you are correct. The current levy does have specific allotments to things like the Majestic. But when the council was reviewing the structure for the renewal of the levy, they decided that Parks and Recreation would have more flexibility if their portion of the levy was not broken out into specific program areas, since they're all administered under the same department. And we felt that this would allow Parks and Rec to focus funds where they're needed most, depending on the changing community needs or priorities over the next 5 years. But I'll make it very clear from my knowledge, the council has no interest in getting rid of the Majestic or reducing its programs.
Okay, and then I'm going to move over to you, Meredith, with the new funding structure. I'm assuming what folks will be most interested in theater comes under Parks and Rec's authority or jurisdiction. Assuming Measure 2141 passes, do you envision the Majestic's budget increasing or decreasing relative to inflation over what they are right now receiving over the next 5 years? In other words, I think what viewers really that are vested in theater will want to know: will the Majestic gain or lose given the change in funding mechanism?
Sure. So right now, the Majestic receives a designated 2.5% of the levy revenue, which equates to about $140,000 a year towards the Majestic. And the way that that's interpreted is nothing more than that. And so, as the mayor was mentioning, this way of kind of this lump sum, consistent with the way the library revenue is allocated, allows us that flexibility to make sure that we can be nimble and change our approach when other revenue sources become available to a certain program area. With that said, I anticipate that flexibility in the way that we are going to allocate the levy revenue is going to be consistent with our current cost recovery philosophy and methodology. And how we do that is on the expense side, we have a lot of indirect or overhead or administrative costs that are allocated proportionally to the different service areas in the department. And that's based on sort of the proportion of the budget, of the expense budget that each of those areas are allotted. And we are going to carry that consistently with the revenue then that comes in from the levy. And so with that methodology, we're able to, projections show that the Majestic Theater would likely receive about double what is currently receiving from the levy. So applying that same cost recovery methodology where we are able to price programs based on where it sits on our cost recovery, what we call the spectrum, and our different targets for different types of programming. And those are preset and those are allocated, through administrative policy, through city council policy. And so it gives us more of that flexibility to offer more affordable programs in another area and possibly charge more in areas that might be more of an exclusive use kind of program at the theater, for instance. So a rental that's for somebody's 60th birthday party, we're able to price that in such a way where revenue is received greater than, say, a summer camp for youth. So with all that being said, the short answer is our projections show that the Majestic Theater would receive more revenue allocation from the levy.
Thank you, Meredith. Charles, I'm going to move back to you for this next question. Given the state of discussion among city staff and electeds, does it seem like voters may be asked to pass other levies or bond measures in the next 5 years? For instance, there's been quite a lot of discussion around city facilities and aging infrastructure. What does that look like over the next 5 years?
Well, honestly, I can't predict the future. In the next 5 years, at the end of that, it might not even be mayor anymore. We might have a completely different city council. There's elections between now and then. But we are currently looking at our city facilities and infrastructure needs because those have been neglected. And we've only had preliminary discussions on how are we going to pay for things. That's always the big question, right? How do you pay for it? And one of those options would be putting something to the voters, but we're very aware of how much we're already asking of the voters. So we're also looking at other ways to fund the needs of the city so we can continue to provide services to the community. So I can't predict whether we would or wouldn't. That'll be up to the council to decide. But we're always looking at other ways to fund our needs.
Right, but I think more to the point, for what the various needs are, is it likely that the city can fund what is required in terms of infrastructure and facility, capital improvements, new build outs because population increase, all that? Mm-hmm. Is that likely to be able to happen either in the next 5 years or perhaps in a longer timeline without some sort of additional revenue?
Voters can look back at actually one of our work sessions where our options, just the initial options, we really have not dived deep into this. And one of the options wouldn't require an additional levy or bond for the voters. There are options that we're looking at that could help fund these programs moving forward. Help, we have aging streets, we have aging sewer, but then we also have just an aging city hall and court system and all that. So, again, I can't speak to the likelihood, but it's very likely that it won't need to go to voters, that we won't ask for more, because there are options that we might be able to pursue to pay for these needs.
So if you had to guess, sitting where you are today, are voters likely to see a measure asking for levy dollars, either operating or bond, in the next 5 years for other stuff from the city?
There's nothing.
What's your best guess?
It's so tough. There's nothing currently being discussed for that need.
Okay. Fair enough. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on. And Charles, I guess the next question is, there has been a fair amount of criticism, and I got to tell you, when we get to viewer questions, I'm going to be more specific. There's been, however, a fair amount of criticism that social services isn't a higher percentage of this levy in terms of annual funding, which is, again, it's $480,000 of annual funding that the city has to grant to social service agencies. Am I understanding that right?
That's what this renewal is allocating. It's $480,000, but the current rate is actually only about $360,000. So we are increasing it. We are trying to adapt to the current need. So we are shifting what gets allocated everywhere else to that $480,000. So that's an increase of $120,000 for social service funding.
Right now, I guess the question that came to mind for some in programs and in editorial board is, though, why not more equal funding to social services?
Well, to be honest, from my point of view, so when I was raising my kids here in Corvallis, we were very impoverished and we couldn't afford a lot of the things that were, we wish we could afford for our children. And so I look at the library and parks as a form of social service for families. I used to take my kid to the riverfront park. They'd play in the water fountain. We would go over and play in Central Park. Then we'd go to the library. And there were so many programs and services there that really met a gap that I could not provide financially for my children. And I'm so thankful that those programs existed. If someone asked me, are we providing enough for social service funding? The answer would be no. I would love to see us find a way to fund that more. But again, putting that burden onto taxpayers, are we, there's a fine line between we're helping or we're hurting. So, is it enough? No. That's why we did increase it, but we don't want to increase the actual levy rate because we understand it's a burden.
You're great. And then Ashlee, I'm going to move back over to you. Is the library looking at large new initiatives over the, say, next 5 or 10 years, like something really big, like major facility add-on, a new facility, maybe a new location, anything like that, that voters want to be aware of, something that's kind of bolder, that's not really part of this conversation at this point?
I would say if you're talking at that scale, I think folks are aware that we do own the law firm building that is right next to the library, with hopes to one day expand into that space. But really looking at the timelines we've put together, that really is not a likely thing that we're going to be pursuing in the next 5 years. In the next 10, probably, I would sure hope that we're starting to make some progress there. But at this point, we are pretty early on into that project. So, if you're talking way huge stuff like that, not in the immediate future. I'd say the things we're pursuing right now are smaller, like solar panels on the library and a main meeting room that can actually have like stream hybrid, events. So that way something like this could be both in person and hybrid at the library main meeting room for the community, which I think is something lacking. Everyone's kind of got their own little spaces they're doing things. So right now we're focused on some more immediate needs, and those big picture things are probably more in the 5 to 10 years, not within the next 5.
Pursuing that just a little more, any options being looked at to increase the number of meeting rooms for public use along those lines?
Well, we actually did just complete a construction project in 2021 where we expanded the second floor of the library, and we now have 4 meeting rooms for free, 2 hours at a time for any community members. You can fit pretty easily 4 to 6 folks in there. We also have a classroom space and a really nice lounge, and then we also created a new conference room. So that just actually was completed.
I think what I was driving at is, I know that booking the main meeting room at the library can be tough finding a date. Any chance of getting another meeting room at that sort of square footage, that sort of level?
Yeah, that would be a hope with that larger expansion. But again, I don't think that would be happening in the next 5 years. It's just with the budget that we would need to really expand the library so significantly, we would really need to pursue a lot of fundraising and grants, and it's really not in the cards in the next 5 years.
And for the viewers at home, am I hearing that in essence, a lot of that funding for that expansion is going to come from outside of a levy like this? And you were okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, great. And then Meredith, I'm going to move over to you. Really, same sorts of questions. kind of larger initiatives, maybe even outside this levy, that you're looking at over the next 5 or 10 years?
Sure. So I would kind of start by saying, yeah, capital improvement projects are a separate funding source than the operating levy, of course. Just want to kind of make that clear. Um, in terms of programs and services, the things that we're focusing on right now are really kind of diving in and evaluating how we can enhance and increase our the programs that are in most high demand. So our swim lesson programs, our summer day camp programs, those are the areas that we're sort of bursting at the seams, have waiting lists, and of course we have limitations with facility space and other ways to support that. But that's something that we're constantly viewing, is evaluating our programs and services. And when we want to expand something or change something, it often means that we're also looking at sort of what could give, because there's only so much resource to go around and support the community, but it's in constant flux. Other kind of bigger program areas that we're looking at, more after school programming. Our sports programming right now is kind of league based, and we get a lot of suggestions and recommendations and needs for parents who are looking for things for their kids to do after school hours, that kind of on an everyday basis. So we're in those kinds of conversations, bigger picture type park improvement things. Of course, we have our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Park improvement project going on, fundraising for that, seeking grants for that, which is getting really close. With those improvements, you're going to see a new fenced dog park, a new basketball court, an adult fitness area, a nature-inspired children's playground, something we don't have in the system, probably another no-cost kind of interactive water feature similar to what's in Riverfront. So making some things more accessible for folks to enjoy that type of activity. And other projects we have, looking at playground replacements and moving to more accessible and inclusive playground design. So our Avery Park playground is slated for replacement next year. We have a skate park expansion project. So we've been really successful with the grants in the last couple of years, and making sure that we have that funding mechanism in place for those types of improvements.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to be moving over to viewer questions. Again, if you do have a question and you want to submit that, it would be CitySpeak@CorvallisAdvocate.com. That's CitySpeak@CorvallisAdvocate.com. I'm going to be combining a number of these questions because in some part, a lot of these are quite related one to the other. We are going to be able to get to most of the viewer questions. There are a few here that I feel are outside of scope. So if you're at home and you had a question that had to do with trash pickup, this isn't that forum. So sorry about that. But if you have questions about social services and paying for the way things are being paid for, that certainly seems to be within the scope. And I'm going to move to this one that is not social services, but it has to do with environmental concerns. Viewer wants to know, why are we not funding more buses, running more often in more places, as a means of moving more vehicles off the road? Another question is, could the city instead be investing in a solar farm so that we are able to reduce the impact of residential electricity use? Charles, I think that is more a question. Those are more questions for you.
It does seem like it. So I'll start off by saying I support both those things. When we saw a reduction in bus services, I worked with the city manager and said we had to get those services back to a level that worked for people. And there's still challenges. We're still dealing with difficulty in finding drivers. So even if we say funded to replace buses now and add more routes, there's not drivers to fill those currently. So we are still struggling and working with the provider to find ways to basically bring more drivers into the system so we can improve with the current routes, their times, and look at expansion as our community grows. That's part of it. I can say when you talk about climate, we have purchased 2 electric buses, or we do have a goal to phase out the current diesel buses with electric, and we've already ordered 2 more. So we are looking towards the future, and part of that future will be expanding services. But right now we are dealing with some challenges, just like a lot of other communities are. And with the solar farm, I completely support that. I've had many conversations with Solarize Corvallis, and it is something that we need to look at. But again, this levy is about services provided, library and parks and things like that. So it's kind of not related, but yeah, I completely support doing those things.
And then those things would be significant expenses that could go into its own separate levy for voters to decide on separately in the future, yes?
If that's what the community wishes, we would definitely look into that. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to me and we can have conversations and see how council feels about it and the community feels about it. But
Yeah.
at this time, it's not being presented.
Right now, and for viewers at home that are interested in getting these kinds of levies on the ballot, you don't have to wait for the city council to put something on the ballot, correct?
Yeah, there is a way that community members can, it's called a ballot petition, and you can collect signatures to demand we want this to be voted on. And it happens from time to time. I know of a couple right now looking for towards the 2024 election. So we'll see if those go through.
Sure. And this happens on the state level all the time. So for viewers at home that have these kinds of initiatives in mind, and if you can get a groundswell of support, certainly the ballot initiative process is available to you on a grassroots level. Okay. This again, I'm going to lob your way, Charles, and I think this is coming. There has been quite a lot of discussion about social services, specifically in terms of providing for homeless. And there is, I would describe from this viewer, sincere angst that we're not finding permanent housing for folks, and that paying for that is something that would serve the community in a number of ways, in terms of having folks no longer on the street and no longer having some of the problems associated with having homeless on the street on the one hand, and on the other hand would be far more humane to people that find themselves in a situation where they are on the street. Why isn't funding for permanent and sometimes supportive or just transitional housing part of this?
Again, it's that rate, right? At what point does it become where it can't be sustained? If we're burdening people to the point where they're losing their homes, we're not fixing anything. Corvallis does a lot of work. We have been supportive of additional housing. There are currently, I think the number is 405 units of affordable housing currently in development. That's more affordable housing than Corvallis has ever seen in its history. And some of that has been supported with using construction excise tax funds. Those are city funds that we put towards guaranteeing affordable housing for a much longer period of time than the traditional means. And I could go down a rabbit hole about this, but if people want to reach out to me, I'll happily talk about affordable housing. When it comes to sheltering, we have been supportive. What's really impacting some of the shelters right now is there was a lot of money during COVID through ARPA funds and other funding that has since kind of dried up. And they're struggling right now to raise funds to keep funding that. And the city is just not in a position to where we can give out the kind of funds that would be required to meet the overall need. There's so much need in the community, and we can't direct all the funds into one spot. So, I mean, some of the funds go to supporting paying bills and keeping people housed instead of just one very narrow area. Although we do need to address that. We need to come up with solutions, and we are always working on it.
So for the viewers that are out there and there's a number of people that have asked about this, in some ways what I'm hearing, and please tell me if I have the context of your answer wrong, in some ways what I think I'm hearing you say is the homelessness issue would cost far more per year to work through um, than does the services like the library and Parks and Rec. And that would be a much larger sum of money. Is that what I'm hearing?
Um, Essentially, yes. But I mean, honestly, if we say canceled everything we provide to the community, everything, closed down all the parks, the library, aquatic center, Majestic, could we fund serious changes to this problem? Yes. And we'd probably get sued. So, there again, I talked about earlier about the park and how important that was for my children, and it's not just my children. I see, families all the time using the parks. It's a place, if they live in an apartment, they don't have access to outdoor space like a private yard. So the parks are essential for mental health, for physical health. Library, same thing. It provides services like, if you can't afford movies, but you can go to the library and check out a movie for free. To provide entertainment options, learning options. My child was a very early reader, and I thank the library for that. So it's really a challenge to try to address every community need. There's a lot of need in our community and a lot of demands, and we are always doing our best to try to find solutions to honestly do everything, but we can't do everything. That's why our focus is on primarily on housing right now, because even these people, if we pay for shelter, that's not a permanent solution. We need to provide housing. We've also redone our mixed-use zones, and we have a tax program coming out to encourage development of housing in those mixed-use zones. So potentially having apartments above businesses downtown, things like that. So we are working on solutions. We're doing the best we can with the tools we have, and we're always looking for additional funding outside of our community.
Right, and then reminding viewers at home, if there's a groundswell of support for more services to homeless folks, the initiative process is open to grassroots efforts in terms of getting something on the ballot to fund these things. So that folks at home have a reminder a little bit, the scale of folks that are homeless in our community. Do you recall those numbers offhand? Last I heard, it was around 1,200 folks.
For the information available, that might be pretty decently accurate. The problem is getting a point in time count that's 100% accurate is very challenging, because it doesn't address all people. We have people that are multiple families staying in one small home, people sleeping on couches, people sleeping in cars, and not everybody gets counted in those counts.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was an aggregated count. It was done for a white paper 2-3 years ago. I think it was the last update. So yeah, I think it was PIT plus. So
yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. Moving right along. On the other end of this conversation, we have folks that prefer to see less dollars spent and are somewhat distressed about all of the various property tax add-ons. So I'm going to contextualize this, because we have a couple of viewers that have asked about this, and one in a particularly articulate way, I felt. Has the city studied how these added taxes affect people on fixed incomes, like senior citizens and disabled folks that are on SSI? And then the viewer also states the GAO did a study in 2018 that found for every $100 in median rent increases, houselessness increases by 9%. Has the city studied how all of these various taxes affect landlords as they increase rents? What this folks does, what these taxes do to folks that are on fixed incomes? Because it's not just this. There's the 9/11 taxing district. There is the school construction bond that's being paid off. There's new taxes on water bills. As the city studied the impact of all of these aggregated taxes, levies on homeowners and on landlords that are providing housing?
So the short answer is no. We have not conducted our own studies. That would usually require hiring outside consultants to collect that data and process data, and that costs money. But we do look at, there's information that comes out by the state. We do look at all that information. We do review our fees and structures on a regular basis. And part of that reason, the council is very sensitive to the rising cost of living in Corvallis. And that's why we made the decision not to increase this levy. This is a flat renewal. We're not increasing it because we understand we ask a lot of our community. And in turn, the community asks a lot of us. You mentioned about the combined school construction bond 911 district and then the city services bill. I actually decided to look into that because the only thing I can really relate to is what am I paying? I'm a homeowner, and I pay all those bills as well. So last year I paid looks like $2,816 in property tax, and the school construction bond 911 district and the current levy, $525 of it went to those things. So out of 2,800, 525. And then I look at my city services bill, and $40 of it per month goes to the police and fire and those other street service fees and sidewalk maintenance fees. So if you add both those together, I pay $1,000.16 annually to provide services to my community and that I take advantage of. So I'm very aware, and I struggle financially. I'm not wealthy. I pay a mortgage and a car payment like a lot of people, and so and most of council's in the same boat. We several members of our council are still employed day jobs. Some even struggle with their rent and cost of living, and we try to take that into consideration every decision we make.
And then, along these lines, there's also a question here of, why is it that we keep, they are assuming, the question is assuming that the city keeps increasing the budget for police. Why not move some of the dollars from police to library and parks and rec?
Well, we do have a growing community.
Mhm.
And with a growing community, there is an increase in services from, needed of the police department. They put out reports, actually, if you follow them on social media, they've been doing a really good job of putting out regular reports of what they respond to. And it's increased. I think we've seen a lot of trauma and stress through COVID, and it's affecting people and how behavioral issues and other issues. Road rage, if you'd have it, and unfortunately, with a growing community, you need to provide more services, and part of that services is an increased police.
Okay, I'm going to move on to kind of next item. In fact, I'm going to move over to Ashlee. At this point, I guess my word, not my words, viewers' words. The library is overrun with homeless folks, and the viewer questions why they would need to pay for what apparently is a facility they don't feel comfortable using over the day, given the homeless folks in, say, the reading room, I suppose. Ashlee, I don't know. I'm doing the best I can to ask that in a tough but civil way. So I'm going to leave it to you, Ashlee.
Well, what I would say is that the library very proudly welcomes every single community member into our doors, and we don't charge for it. You get to, have a safe, dry space with working bathrooms, with access to the internet, lots of materials, as long as you abide by the library's code of conduct. And so we've got a set, outline of behavioral expectations that we have of every single person in the library. And we do have paid security attendants at the library during all our open hours who enforce those rules. And so we have about 1,200 people a day through our doors. And, as a person who's in the building all the time, every day, I see lots of different people, families, seniors, college students, homeless, of course, you name it, right? Everyone in the community is using the library. And so if anyone ever does feel unsafe, I'm really sorry to hear that, but it's really easy to find our security attendant. They have a desk right at the front. Let them know you have witnessed a behavioral issue, and we'll deal with it right away. But I do want to say, if there's someone who is experiencing houselessness at the library, most of the time, in my experience, they are just enjoying a nice, safe, dry place to spend the day, not bothering anyone, and using the Wi-Fi. So, for the most part, I think that the library is very safe. And after we had let's see, it was about 7 years ago, we created a permanent security attendant position for the library and saw our calls to police drop by 70%. So we have seen a really marked change in the library atmosphere. And so it's also possible they may just have experienced something a long time ago, and it's not really representative of the library's atmosphere today.
Thank you, Ashlee. And then Meredith, I'll move over to you. There's a corollary to that question, which is especially with the new right to rest law and the city response to that new state law. Viewer feels as though they're just paying for de facto campgrounds for homeless folks. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I think that this is going to be an area that continues to evolve, especially as those time, place, and manner designations, and we really understand and how the houselessness population responds to that, and how compliant they are or are not. With regards to illegal camping, I mean, it's still illegal to camp for 24-hour period or more. And that is still an unlawful activity that Parks Department works hand in hand with the police department and other departments to find that balance of responding to that and enforcing that type of activity in the parks with the resources and the policy directives that we have available to us and been directed to follow. So with that being said, it's less than 5% of the park maintenance budget that is really kind of being spent on enforcement of illegal camping activity. And there's lots of opinions on whether it should be more or less than that. I would say that without the levy funding, it would likely decrease our park maintenance capabilities. And so, that would probably have an impact on our ability to respond and enforce those activities.
Okay, and
Steve, do you mind if I just add my 2 cents to that as well?
in fact, I was going to ask if you would like.
Sure. For me, it's really simple. Our parks and our library are there for everyone in the community to use. We don't discriminate on who gets to use them and who doesn't. That is it.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and move back to Meredith on this one. Parks and Rec. If this levy passes, would you consider installing more parking at area trailheads? Questioner, I may or may not be aware that many of those trailheads are in fact, the parking for those trailheads is in fact OSU property. So at the same time, I'm assuming there are some options in some places to create more parking. City folks in Corvallis are using Mac Forest far more than they did prior to the pandemic. Parking is clearly not kept up. So I don't know, Meredith, if there's anything you can say to that, but questioner is asking.
I think it's separate than a levy question, because the levy is again for operating and for service. A parking lot would be considered a capital improvement, so it would be a separate funding source. That being said, I would probably have to dive into that question a little bit more to see if there's a specific location, like you were talking about, that that the viewer is asking about. Our parking lots at trailheads, we have the two at Bald Hill, Chip Ross. Those are our kind of most popular city trailheads. Willamette Park has parking, and so I do think that when I, speak with the other kind of land managers in the area, OSU, Greenbelt Land Trust, the county, a lot of that similar type of conversation is related to, like you mentioned, OSU properties up in the Oak Creek area beyond Bald Hill, and other areas. So happy to, take a question offline from that individual and talk more about it.
And I almost wonder if the question is more something for Charles as a long-term question. It is something that seems to have changed over the last few years, as usage has increased in Mac Forest. Does the city at some point have an interest in working with OSU about getting more parking for their forest?
We're constantly working on maintaining a healthy relationship with OSU, and that's something that if there's a way to collaborate on any improvements that benefit the community, I'm sure we'd be interested in having a discussion around that.
Okay, great. And viewer, my own 2 cents as a moderator, completely unsolicited. When the weather is not great, those parking lots clear out pretty well, and you get to really run around all you want in the forest. So, okay. Back to viewer questions. As new housing units have been built, hasn't the tax base also increased? In other words, there's more money coming in. And wouldn't that seem to negate on some level the need for levies and to continue the levy at the same rate as it is now? Charles?
So, I mean, yes, there has been new housing developed and things, and that does increase the tax base. However, new housing comes more people. More people equals more demand on our services. So yes, as we do receive obviously more funding due to those housing, but we're also being asked for more from the community. That's more people having books delivered to their home from the library, or using our parks, or signing up for programs, using the pool, everything. So I don't think it's not enough to cover the additional services.
And then the next question, kind of related to that, real estate values have doubled. So isn't the city already getting more money just from the same property owners because of increased property taxes? Is, I guess, what's really being asked there is, given the property tax increases following the assessed value increases, which is different than real market value. If you can unwrap that for this viewer, I don't know if they understand how that works.
I can try.
I just angled forming up that question for the viewer.
Sure.
So sorry.
No, understandable. And I've had conversations. I spend a lot of time at the farmers market, most people know, and I've had those conversations. So, I mean, again, we're not asking for more money. We're keeping it at the same rate. Has real market value, like what you could sell your home for, has that gone up? Yes, which is not good. It's great for some people. So yeah, that's gone up, I think, around 50%. It has doubled. But if you're a homeowner and you pay taxes, you log into the county assessor's website, and there's your real market value, which is what you can sell your home for. But then there's the county assessor's assessed market value, which is substantially less. And I think that's only increased, I don't know, like maybe around 18%. So with the rising cost in maintaining services, that little bit of increase it's not the same as your market value increase. So it's not really raising the amount of money the city's collecting in this levy that significantly.
And for the viewers out there, and I mangled the question, I correct me if I am wrong, Charles, but there is an annual cap. That this, is there not?
Yeah, by state law, the taxes only can increase 3% annually. That is it, 3%.
Right. Okay. So Just wanted to clarify. Okay, and then I think with that, we have come towards the end here. I want to go ahead and give everybody about a minute each to just kind of maybe give a parting bit of information. I want to make clear for the viewers at home that both Ashlee Chavez and Meredith Petit are in fact city employees. They can't really express an opinion about Measure 2141. They can only tell you the way, really kind of illuminate the way that their departments operate, the way their budgets operate. That said, Ashlee, I'll start with you if you want to give a minute on just what you feel is important for people to know about the library operation.
Sure. Um, so as Meredith stated at one point in our presentation here, this local option levy is for operational costs. And so every year, the library and Parks and Rec and our grants for social services receive an allotment of this levy. And so that dollar amount, as stated, is about 35% of the library's budget. And so really we have three big costs at the library: maintaining our building, purchasing materials for folks to check out, and the staff to do all of that work. And there are some things that you can finesse in a budget, and then there are other things that cost the same all the time. A computer system, right? Doesn't matter if you're open 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 24 hours, computer system costs the same. And so when you really get down to what you have to work with within a budget, you really only have a couple of levers to pull. And for us, it's hours and it's how much materials we can purchase, and then the staffing to actually provide that. So as I stated, the levy helps continue providing services at our existing level, which is 7 days a week, open hours, with a fairly substantial materials budget that really allows us to buy a large and diverse collection for the entire community to take advantage of.
Thank you, Ashlee. Meredith, I'll move over to you. Parks and
Sure.
Rec.
Thanks again for the opportunity. And also just want to make everybody, encourage everybody to continue to do their research and ask the questions. And thank you for viewing tonight. Along the same lines as Ashlee, just kind of piggybacking off and maybe expanding a little bit. Parks and Recreation, you know, the way that I look at it is we're in the people business. The majority of our budget is personnel. And Parks and Recreation, if you visit the Aquatic Center, you're greeted at the front desk by a person. There are multiple lifeguards watching over the pool, keeping people safe. There's a swim instructor in the pool teaching your child how to swim, or you know, facilitating an exercise program. We have a supervisor and maintenance crews making sure that that facility is safe. And so when we think about, you know, what the levy is providing, it's those people that really impact the people that come into our door. And I always love hearing the stories of how we impact those who are utilizing the services. So, you know, we have stories, daily stories of older adults coming into the swimming pool, you know, using a cane or a walker. And, you know, a few months later, after participating, they no longer need to use that. Or using the community garden as therapy, you know, during a terminal illness, or so that somebody doesn't have to use the food pantry. And that's what I really like to connect with in Parks and Recreation. It's the people here in the department that are impacting the people that live in the community.
Thank you, Meredith. And then Charles, of course, you can, as an elected official, you can express opinions freely if you wish to. And I'll move over to you, Charles, as mayor.
Thank you, Steve. As you just stated, yeah, I am not an employee of the city. I can campaign all I want for this, and I do. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and answer questions. And if you see me in the community, please come up and talk to me, and I'll happily talk about any issue that you want to bring up. What I'd like to say to anybody viewing and now or possibly later, think about what makes community special, makes this community special for you. Why do you live here? You know, it's not just the weather, although it's generally pretty nice. Corvallis is special. We have amazing features and accessibility to all sorts of programs. We have some of the best parks anywhere, in my opinion. You know, we have the Majestic, which has amazing plays. We have the pool, which has programs and events and entertainment there, even at the pool. My child learned to swim there, one of those programs. You know, where else can you go and do so much for so little? And it just really enriches people's lives. And I think that's what makes Corvallis special, is those opportunities that are provided. So please, please vote yes. Let's continue funding these services and funding what makes Corvallis special.
Thank you, Mayor Maughan. I want to thank, of course, Meredith Petit from Parks and Rec, Ashlee Chavez from the library, Charles Maughan, Mayor, taking time in their evening. Advocate staff that make all of this possible behind the scenes. They do most of the work. I appreciate that, of course. First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op, Peak Sports, thank you for helping with funding for these. And for our viewers at home, thank you for being engaged within your community's shared decision making and taking the time to listen this evening. Ballots will be in the mail soon. You need to get them in by the 7th. Look for the advocate's endorsement sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I think that is